días todavía. Ya perdí la noción del tiempo rápidamente. Es un gusto tener aquí al doctor Colin Allen para hablarnos sobre la evolución del expertise, de la pericia. La visita del doctor Allen es una segunda visita de profesores que hemos estado de alguna manera copatrocinando la Facultad de Psicología con el Instituto de Investigaciones Filosóficas, lo cual nos da muchísimo gusto hacer, y espero que podamos realmente ir consolidando más un intercambio de los intereses que hay por allá, sobre todo en cuestiones relacionadas con procesos cognitivos que han gran interés y que ciertamente aquí en la facultad también podría ser un trampolín en el que se adoptaran esas ideas. Lo presento muy rápido al doctor Allen, que en su doctorado lo obtuvo en UCLA, en la Universidad de California en Los Ángeles, en el 89, y sus intereses son muy amplios en filosofía e historia de la biología y ciencias cognitivas, particularmente dándose a conducta animal, cognición animal. Ha tenido numerosos proyectos de investigación financiados por el National Endowment for the Humanities, National Science Foundation, y una parte muy importante, tremendamente relevante para todos nosotros psicólogos o interesados en aspectos cognitivos, son las capacidades morales de las máquinas, cuyo trabajo ha sido tremendamente citado y relevante. El doctor Allen ha escrito más de 100 capítulos, libros, artículos especializados, numerosas conferencias, y yo quisiera aquí nada más mencionar sus libros, que creo que es parte de lo que nos va a hablar, una cruce encrucijada de varios de esos temas. Máquinas morales, cómo enseñarle a los robots el bien y el mal, especies de mente, la evolución de la mente, los propósitos de la naturaleza, el animal cognitivo, y en sus labores e intereses docentes tienen 2 sitios para la enseñanza de valores que están disponibles. Entonces es un gusto tenerlo aquí. Yo no me puedo más decir cosas más interesantes que en estos momentos. Thank you very much. Very welcome to the Psychology.
Thank you. So thank you for that introduction, and I think I'll stand because the computer's too far away for me to see what's there, and I need to talk a little bit about what's here. So again, thank you for coming out, thank you for the invitation, and I hope that this illustrates some of the important interplay between philosophical thinking and cognitive investigations. And this project that I'm going to talk about is part of a large funded project that we have that's based at Indiana University and the Stone Age Institute on human cognitive evolution. The principal investigators are all shown in this picture here, except for this character in the middle who is long since past investigating anything, actually a replica of a Neanderthal skeleton. But Kathy Schick and Nick Toth are the founders and directors of the Stone Age Institute, which is an independent institute located near Bloomington, Indiana. And they are anthropologists and cognitive scientists who've long worked on stone tool manufacture going back a very long time. Tom Schoenemann is an anthropologist and primatologist and brain scientist who's interested in the expansion of primate brains through evolutionary time. Peter Todd, a psychologist who works on many different issues. He's probably even broader than I am, but with relevance to this project, having to do with the evolution of search mechanisms and beings. And then myself, and I'll tell you what I'm up to, but I'm a philosopher by training, but maybe cognitive scientist by inclination. and they try to mix things up. And we received a very generous grant from the John Templeton Foundation that runs for 3 years to carry out this project. And the project has numerous goals. I'm just giving you a sample of them here. But one of them is to identify likely drivers of brain expansion in the hominins, especially from 3 million years ago to 1.5 million years ago. Although we're interested in what happens after that, our own set of expertise really kind of makes us focus on this very early period, which is also particularly understudied and interesting, and the data is sparse, and that raises all sorts of issues for us. In particular, then, what's an epistemology of early hominin cognition, given this very sparse record? And I mean, both what do the early hominins themselves know about what they're doing, and what do we know about what they're doing? So I use this term epistemology ambiguously here deliberately. And as I said, one of the goals is to try to find ways to make use of sparse evidence from fossils and artifacts and the byproducts of those artifacts, taphonomy, which is more the physics of the sites in which these are found, the geological, physical aspects of them, comparative animal cognition, which is where some of my interests come in, but also other people in the group. And then investigating comparatively modern people who are making stone tools, either because it's a hobby or because perhaps anthropologically they can be visited, but also current animals to draw conclusions about cognition. So I've already given you a brief overview of sort of the contributions of each of the others, and my particular part of this project is in expertise and in recognition of expertise as an evolutionary cultural driver for this process. And I'm going to, at some point, tell you what I think expertise is. For now, I'm just going along with a sort of casual understanding of it. I want to tell you a little bit more about the project. So, in addition to being at the Stone Age Institute, which is a fantastic facility that Nick and Kathy have built, we also have collaborators in 3 overseas sites from the US. One in the Republic of Georgia, one in China, the Mekong Basin, and one in Tanzania. We as a group have visited these 2 already. We're going to this one in August. And to just put those geographically, our collaborators there are the directors of the various archaeological projects there. So David Lorkowitz at the Georgia National Museum actually discovered the first fossil cranium at the site in Tbilisi in the Republic of Georgia. Xingao, Gaoxing, if you've heard the Chinese order, is director of the Institute of Paleoarchaeology and Paleoanthropology in Beijing, and also one of the principals of the Mekong Basin site. And then Jackson and Zhao is actually a colleague at Indiana University, but he's also director of the Olive Gorge site and works with the Tanzania National Museum. So we have good contacts in all of these places, and part of the goal for this group is to take people like me, who knew very little about this kind of material, and actually expose us to the sites, understand the physical properties of these sites, and get a feel for what the challenges are for acquiring the materials and understanding where they are and why they're there, and thinking about what kinds of inferences we can make about the cognitive aspects of this. And so, for example, at the Tanzanian site, there are tools being made from materials that actually lie many kilometers away from the actual tool manufacture site. So we can infer from that they were carrying materials. And we can also note that the material we don't find some of the very earliest byproducts of flaking. So it looks like they're starting some of the flaking there, but they're carrying these rocks back to finish the process at this other site. So this gives us some idea about how the environment is being exploited and what kind of planning is going on in this process. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, which I'm assuming, does anybody know anything about this? So good. And those of you who are not familiar with this, the stone tools show a progression in form, and the oldest known stone tool paleoarchaeological site now is 3.3 million years ago in Lamekwi, which is in the northern part of Kenya. and many, many artifacts there, but no fossils. So we don't know exactly which organism was producing these, but we can make some guesses about it. The Olduvai site is extremely well known. It's just across the border in Tanzania, so northern Tanzania. It was the first site where these things were found, and of course the famous Lucy fossil was also found there. So there are both fossils and stone artifacts at this site. And it was occupied for a very, very long time. So it goes back to about 2.6 million years ago, as indicated here, but there's continuous use of that site right up to about 1.5 million years ago. So very long time there, and changes in forms and tools. And around about 1.5 million years ago, you get what are known as Acheulean tools, and that is actually named after the location in France where these were first found. So the village of Saint-Achille was where they first discovered these rather large and impressive symmetric stone X's. But those have now been found in sites such as Olduvai, not Lumekri, it's much older, and in other sites in China and elsewhere. So this is some sort of transition in the technology going on through time, to give you an idea of time scale that's involved. I should say, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me as well. I'm used to it. Our cognitive science program, you're lucky if you get past the second slide. So, all right. So the question here is, how much data can we really gather to try to answer the kinds of questions we have about what kinds of organisms were doing this, what their cognitive capacities were, what other kinds of inferences can we make? And so, how sparse are the data? And in one sense, they're quite sparse. So we only have a few fossil cranium, for instance. So we can only make some limited inferences about brain size, and I'll show you the data there in a moment. But on the other hand, they're not sparse at all. So there are actually thousands and thousands of these stone artifacts coming out of these sites. And so this was in the Republic of Georgia. This is just a sample, a tiny fraction of all the pieces they collected from that Dingwisi site, right? So there's huge amounts of this. And in some cases, you can actually begin to fit pieces back together again. So you have not just a tool, but you have the other pieces and can try to reassemble them. In other cases, though, and this is in Shanxi province in China, every single piece in this pile of rubble here has been individually labeled. Right? It's an artifact, or a product, a byproduct of making an artifact. And the challenge of actually putting all that back together is, there's tens of thousands of items here, right? So we have a lot of material, but we have a huge problem trying to figure out how it all fits together, both conceptually and literally, physically. And this is also from that same site, Shanxi, which is a more modern site than the Lihuan Basin that we're looking at. It probably only dates back about 700,000 years, so it has many, many of these Acheulean hand axes at that particular site. I'm hoping to go back there and show you. So if we go back to Lumekri in the 3.3 million years ago site, we find pieces like this, which are basically flaked off some core. All right, so the idea is there's a piece of rock, you knock a piece off with another piece of rock, and you're only interested in the flake. So they're knocking off a single flake, using it, discarding it when it gets blunt, knocking off another flake, perhaps from the same core, and continuing. Right? So it's fairly basic sort of technology. As you get to the older one, you get now more diversity of forms. So you find these round ones, you find things that are not quite round, they've got pieces knocked out of them, and you also find these kind of bifacial, what are called bifacial choppers. So they've knocked two flakes out of one, right, and now it affords something other than simple slicing, which a single flake can do. Right? So they're hitting more than once to produce a tool, and sometimes many times more than once. And there's also resharpening. So there's evidence of resharpening. So when it gets blunt, they'll knock more out of it. Okay? So the process is more complicated, and again, we want to try to understand what that process is. And then, of course, as we go to the Acheulean, we find these much larger pieces. And what's distinctive about these much larger axes is they're bifacial. So in the bifacial chopper here, they're knocking two flakes off the same side of a core piece of rock. Here, they're turning it over and knocking off both sides. So it's, again, an elaboration of the technology. All right, so this chart here provides a dot for every single fossil hominid that is intact enough to be able to get an estimate of the cranial volume. Okay, so volume inside the brain. And this is by my colleague Tom Schoenemann. I apologize, the lighting in here doesn't make this too clear. Maybe if there's a way to turn up just the front light, that would be helpful. Good, I think that's a little bit more visible. Right, good. Right, so every mark here corresponds to a fossil specimen that's been allocated to a particular species. So these are all measurements of cranial capacity from those species, and this is time, this is the present, this is 5 million years ago. So we're starting to look around about here when the fossil evidence is available, puts the range here only slightly above the modern range of chimpanzees. So this band here.
Homo erectus comes to be the dark blue.
Homo erectus is
Dark blue,
here, dark blue, so here, yes, right. And I should also say, there's much discussion among the paleoanthropologists here about the species classifications. And so this represents the classification as given by the people who describe the fossil, but we're beginning to think, or people are beginning to think that some of those specializations, some of those divisions are perhaps not correct. And in fact, the Dmanisi set is extremely important for this, because Dmanisi is the only site to have produced 5 cranial fossils within the same location and roughly the same time period with all these tools. So it's an enormously rich site from the fossil plus stone tool perspective. And so I think there are 4 at least visible of these things that are labeled as Homo georgicus, right? But that's not an accepted species classification anymore. But what's really remarkable about these, so this is about 1.7 million years ago, is that the range of distribution is such that previously people would have said, oh, there are different species here, right? So it turns out that the largest one is over 800 cc's and the smallest one is only at about 550 cc's. That's a huge percentage difference, right? But we have pretty good circumstantial evidence that it's one species, right? So that complicates the whole story of classification of these things in a way. Also, it's worth pointing out that the largest known excuse me, I'm just blanking, a Neanderthal, which is this dot up here, right, specimen, is larger than any of the contemporaneous Homo sapiens specimens, right? So if you think that the Neanderthals went extinct because they had smaller brains, that can't be right. Something else is different. Something else is going on.
The cranial capacity is cranial capacity relative to body size, or just
straight cranial capacity?
Okay.
Yes, that's right. And then this green line, which you can barely see here, is the extent range of Homo sapiens, right? So we also have quite a high range of variation. And for those of you who've heard about this Homo floresiensis that's been called hobbit, found on this Indonesian island, it's down here. And yet we have evidence that it's actually got sophisticated tool use, things that you would associate more with hominids of this, right? So brain size isn't everything either. There's something very interesting going on, perhaps in the way in which the brain tissue is distributed among different parts of the brain. And that's one of the questions that Tom Schoenemann is pursuing. He's very interested in seeing whether we can detect in here evidence for expansion in areas, particularly temporal lobes, that we know are relevant to both fine motor manipulation for tool manufacture and speech and gesture, right? So can we tell from the inside of the skull that the brain is expanded more in this direction than in this direction, for instance, right? So that's one of his contributions to this. So again, this just overlays where the different technologies are with respect to this. So you can see, even by the time you're still, barely on average about half of modern size, you're beginning to get these more forces, together tools. All right, so this is really cautionary. There are many people who want to explain this expansion in brain capacity and this sort of ramp up to human cognition in terms of single factors. So some people think it's tool use itself that leads to whatever it is that we have now, big brains and awful technology. Some people think it's fire, which enables us to cook our food, which enables us to sustain more brain tissue because we can get more nutrition out of that food. Other people say it's a social change where there's more group living and even allo-parenting, so non-related individuals taking care of offspring of younger ones. Some people, of course, want to make it language as the critical development that sort of causes this takeoff. And in general, I and many other people are sort of against these sorts of single-factor explanations, and we're similarly against anything that just sort of tries to chain them together. Right? First there's this, then there's this, then there's this. The better picture is some kind of complex feedback, where change in sociality enables a change in tool technology, which further enhances the change in sociality. And then climate is changing, and that is putting new ecological demands on the individuals. And fire, the ability to control it also then feeds back in being able to sustain larger and larger brains, and so on. So that kind of multifactorial approach is what's here. So I don't, I want to be very clear, I don't mean to be saying that expertise or recognition of expertise is the explanation for all of this. I think it's one of these complex factors interacting in various ways that actually sort of enables this ramp up to happen. It's this complex feedback system. And in this, I'm really very much in line with this recent book by Kim Sterelny, a philosopher, called The Evolved Apprentice, where he looks at the span of human evolution, focuses a little more on the later period that I'm talking about, so the last million years rather than the first 2 million years. Eschews all, rejects all kinds of single-factor explanations and tries to tell a complex interactive story about how it came to be that humans uniquely learn from each other. And this is the notion of an apprentice. We watch others and we learn from it as a key feature of human behavior. Which is not to say that chimpanzees don't do it too, but chimpanzees, for instance, the tool-making chimpanzees and the tool-using chimpanzees in the Thai forest who use rocks to crack open nuts, basically learn from their mothers. There's not much other learning from non-related individuals going on, right? So something happens in humans that allows us to start learning more things from non-related individuals, members of the group, and so on. And Sterelny, as this review by Tim Lewins, History, Philosophy of Science at Cambridge, says Sterelny's in the business of offering a plausible narrative of how we came to be so reliant and so good at transmitting increasingly informative bodies of expertise from one generation to the next. So there's that word expertise, and that sort of gives me partly the impetus to try and figure out what we're talking about when we talk about expertise. I think it's also important, and I'm not going to read this whole abstract to you, but Lewins points out just what Sterelny is doing. And Sterelny himself says, this is not a traditional philosophy book. It's more in the genre of what used to be called natural philosophy, where we're trying to combine information from the natural sciences in ways so as to come up with a coherent theory. And Lewins sort of praises this and says, it's far more than a how possibly story, it's something more like a detailed, quite probably actually story, right? So it's evidence-based, it's not just speculative in that sense, although some elements of it are necessarily speculative. But it is philosophical because it relies on the empirical work of others, and that's what I'm doing. I'm not doing the empirical work, I'm just trying to connect a whole bunch of dots. And it involves this kind of conceptual ground clearing loved by philosophers, as Lewis says. So again, this question, what do I mean by expertise, is going to be part of that conceptual ground clearing. That's what we're doing here. So really, I see myself in the spirit of Wilfred Sell as that philosophy is the study of how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term, right? So, but not doing it from an armchair or a priori way, doing it in a way that takes whatever available evidence we have and tries to make the most coherent story out of it. And so my own research, maybe you don't know me, but I've engaged in a number of collaborative projects and individual projects looking at things as widely divergent as fish cognition and consciousness, to a recent paper in cognition where we applied topic modeling to Darwin's reading list and draw some conclusions about his own foraging behavior within the literature that's available to him. And so I have these broad interests that intersect with many different aspects of cognitive science. And during the very kind of introduction, these books were mentioned, and so my own career has been sort of how we make the move from doing ethology, simply studying animal behavior in an evolutionary context, to a cognitive ethology. How do we draw inferences about the cognition of these animals in a responsible way? And we need something similar here. We need to go from paleoethology to something like cognitive paleoethology. And a paper I found helpful in thinking about this recently is from 2014 in the Journal of Zoology, a proposed framework for establishing and evaluating hypotheses about the behavior. So this is just behavior, this is ethology, not cognitive ethology. But they produce a long list, I've just pulled this out of the paper, of things that need to be taken into account when you're dealing with this kind of remote evidence. So you have to be specific about what you're talking about from a hypothesis and taxon point of view, and about your terminology. This is an important lesson. You have to remember that behavior is extraordinarily plastic. So animals are very adaptive to different circumstances. And functional morphology. So we can actually make inferences from things like the change in hand characteristics through the fossil record. We shouldn't just be looking at crania, right? We should be looking at other parts of the anatomy. All of this works together. Behavioral comparison to extant taxa, using the taxa that are as close as possible phylogenetically. This one will be also important. Rare behavior should be considered. So we're not necessarily looking for what everything is doing. We're looking for innovations or novelties which might help us understand something. Just a reminder that we need strong evidence, but we also have to remember that things have multiple functions. So there are in fact multiple pressures on, let's say, hand evolution or shoulder evolution. So we have adaptations for throwing that enable us to generate. But though it turns out those adaptations for throwing, what's unique in humans is we have a flexible wrist. Chimpanzees don't have this. So when we throw, that little flick you give at the end actually has the same principle as a bullwhip, right? Where the energy is transmitted and concentrated into a smaller and smaller piece. So at the end, the crack of the whip is actually exceeding the speed of sound. You're breaking the sound barrier at the tip of the whip because of the physics of the whip. Our shoulder, elbow, wrist, arm design follows that same principle. So we generate an enormous amount of velocity by transferring the energy from here to here, that final flick, giving you the huge propulsion. No chimpanzee can do that because their wrists are just fixed. But then when it comes to making tools, we also generate velocity, right? We don't just go right, we go right. And if you can control that, you have an enormous range of control. So we have to think about this in a total context of anatomy and neuroscience, right? Issues of being, sampling bias and what's the physical layout of the places you're getting it from, you have to be aware of that. And searching for additional lines of evidence, which is sort of what we're engaged in today, right? What else can we bring to bear on these questions? So if we move into, cognitive paleoethology, I think we can sort of adapt these into the cognition. So we want to be more specific, or as specific as we can be about our cognitive terminology. And I want to say, remember, cognition makes behavior even more extraordinarily plastic, right? And there's also a connection here to rare behaviors, because going back to the idea of Baldwin, that behavior leads evolution. So behavioral changes actually drive evolutionary changes. Then we can also see how rare behaviors might feed into that process. So if you can do something innovative, then you can go to work on making it easier and easier for the organisms to do that to repeat that thing that was the innovation. So this is, again, just to sort of say, this is a good framework for thinking about these issues. So, under the guise of specificity about cognitive terminology, what do I mean by expertise? Well, if you go to a dictionary, this is a dictionary definition, it says expert skill or knowledge in a particular field. And expert skill or knowledge in a particular field doesn't quite capture what I want. And here's an illustration of this. So many monkeys are experts at clambering through trees, right? And the young ones may even learn it from their mothers, right? As to where, what's safe to cross and what's not safe to cross. You or I would have terrible trouble with this. But it's not clear to me that they have expertise. And here's the distinction I want to make. I want to say it's not just high skill in a species, because basically all the monkeys within some range have this expert ability, right? But what we're really interested in here is different specializations by members of the species, right? So I can be expert in making a tool, you can be expert in using the tool, right? My expertise lies in one thing, your expertise lies in something else. There are individual within species differences. So instead of knowledge in a particular field, there's an individualized knowledge in a particular field. And I think it's very important because it promotes learning from experts. So if there are differential abilities, then you can learn better from some than others, perhaps, if you can recognize who has that expertise, right? Which leads to a kind of division of labor. So if I can recognize that you're really good at using the spheres that I make, and I'm much better at making them, I'm horrible at throwing them, then we can actually now specialize further, right? I'll make them, you use them, you share some of yours. So if we have the right social organization, right, we can go to a division of labor, and that further provides a context in which individuals then, if they can recognize their own abilities and the expertise of others, can choose, to use Sorelli's term, to apprentice themselves to a spear maker or to a spear thrower. So we can get this kind of division of labor going if we have these kinds of different specializations within the species. And that supports effective collaboration to where you can build large structures, right, without everybody doing the same job or being capable of doing the same job. But it's all within a social context in which that kind of collaboration, cooperation can be sustained. So all of these changes have to be happening simultaneously. So then, just if I were to write the dictionary definition, which I don't, it's expert skill or knowledge in particular, interest-specific, right, within the species specialization that I'm interested in. And so when we look at our modern world, we see all sorts of different expertise. The person who's making the windows is not the same as the person who's doing the brickwork or the stonework, or even the design work for the buildings. And the person riding the bike isn't the same person who's making the bike, or even perhaps even repairing the bike, right? So we have all of these different things in this very complex environment in which we now find ourselves. And somebody made the roads as well. And somebody made the tar to make the roads, right? And so we have this incredible differentiation which works to produce a whole context in which we now live. So when we look at the tools, we go back and look at the tools, one of the things that has been pointed out before by Glenn Isaac, is that in the very oldest tools, there are only a few different forms, and there tends to be quite a lot of variation within each of those forms. As you go further, there are more forms, and the form gets tighter, right? So there's more precision in the production of those tools. And I'm only talking about these first two periods and the Lemaitre before it. As we go further down, then we get into even further differentiation, making arrowheads and these kinds of things, which you don't find at all down here. So requiring very fine motor skill, and even artistic objects then also come into the picture. But what we can't tell from this is whether everybody who's making tools is, everybody who's doing it is getting better at producing all of these different forms, or is it the case that, at this peak sits one group of experts and at this peak sits another group of experts, so you become a specialist in arrowhead making or a specialist in axe making or whatever, right? That's really the question here. At what point do these different elements detach from each other and become independent specializations? And of course, this doesn't talk about the use of the tools either, which I've already suggested as another kind of independent specialization. So the peak's narrow and diversified, but is it due to individual specialization or expertise? We'd like to know. So what are the markers of expertise? How do we know that somebody's an expert? And we'll just start that right now. not thinking about the stone tools necessarily, is, well, one thing I might do is just look at what you make. Can I tell from the object itself, its intrinsic properties, that this must have been made by an expert, or very likely was. So if you get some beautifully shaped object, it's highly unlikely that happened either by chance or by some unskilled fumbling around, right? So certain markers in the objects themselves are there, and that's, I think, what's sort of indicated by the narrowing of peaks through time here. So, what sort of is a broad range of different things becomes sort of a tighter, more clustered peak. Right? It's also worth mentioning right here, and this comes back to the taphonomy angle of this, is that the material you have to work with makes a huge difference to the quality of the product that you produce. So you can go to some of the Chinese sites where the tools look really crude compared to, they're still Acheulean hand axes, let's say, but they look really crude compared to hand axes being made contemporaneously at other sites. But frankly, the material that they've got, pardon my English, is crap, right? So the rocks just don't support that kind of nicer production. Right? So that's a further complication when you think about trying to make inferences about the cognitive sophistication involved. So we can also, if we could watch the maker, which of course we can't for these extinct individuals or species, we can see how fast or how efficiently, how little waste they produce in producing something. That might give us some indicator of expertise. Right? Just watching the person making it. I don't look at the product, I just look at their activities while making it. I can also look at how well the tool works. So again, I don't have to see the maker for this. I could just say, does this do the job that it's supposed to do? So if I can take a really skilled hunter and give them 2 spears and they can't catch anything with 1 spear and they can catch a lot of things with the other spear, then I can infer that the other spear was perhaps made by a better expert, right? And then we have social markers. So we do, in modern day, we can say, well, who are people going to learn from, right? So we can use the social information to identify expertise by looking at who's going there. And similarly, association with prestige individuals. So people who have a lot of money or power often gather the relevant experts, right, and provide patronage for them. So again, in the modern era, we have, so currently we can get behavioral evidence of this. Could we find any evidence of that in this very old fossil and artifact record? That's really hard to say. And then, of course, there are communicative and linguistic markers. So sometimes, and this is why I call these markers, not conditions, sometimes people who can talk really well about what they're doing give us some indication that they actually know what they're talking about. Right? Of course, that's a signal that can be faked, but it's actually not a signal that can be easily faked, particularly when you're around other experts. So it's easy to pretend to be the expert in something when nobody in the room knows anything. So that's what I'm doing today, right? Right? But if I gave this talk in front of a bunch of other experts, right, they would know very quickly whether I know what I'm talking about or not. But even so, if I was up here sort of humming and hawing, even if you're not experts, you might come to the conclusion I don't really know what I'm talking about. Right? So it's a noisy but still credible marker of expertise. But again, something that we're unlikely to get good evidence from the time period that I'm talking about. But that's just my initial attempt to think through what are the different kinds of evidence and expertise that we might have available in some way. So when we apply it to the cognitive paleoarchaeology case, how can we detect it? So I've already hinted this. What range of skills is represented in the tools for any one site? So can we see a change over 100,000 years or 500,000 years or 1 million years? Are they getting better using the same materials at producing things, right? And given what I told you is not actually that sparse a record. There's all of this material out there, but it's incredibly awful job to go through it all by hand. Could we actually do something like mass scan it all and then use some algorithms to try to fit it all together and analyze it in some quantitative way? That's sort of a dream, but I think it's not an impossible dream. It would require another $3 million from the Templeton Foundation to do it, right? And then, of course, going more into some areas that I'm particularly interested in, how can we use comparative methods? So do other animals that we have access to now recognize expertise? How do we modern humans recognize expertise? And I already talked about sort of form, functionality, production efficiency, social prestige, and linguistic fluency. I got the order two of those reversed, but the same 5 things I was just talking about. So can we look at that in current English? So Nick Toth, one of our principals, is actually the person who taught Kanzi, the bonobo, to make stone tools. About 10 years ago, he did a number of demonstrations for Kanzi, and this has just been a video. I'm not going to run the whole thing, but Kanzi's task is to knock off a flake that's sharp enough for him to go cut a rope and get some food out of a box. Right? So the static image that I had was him succeeding at the end of this, and you'll see he's paying attention to what he's doing. It's actually quite dangerous. You can hurt yourself, both by jamming a piece of your, one of your digits here, or by cutting yourself if you're not careful. But when he gets a flake sharp enough, he puts it in his mouth and walks off and goes and cuts the rope. Okay? So we know, I say this is expertise because bonobos in general don't do this, right? He's got some specialist knowledge here. Maybe bonobos in general are capable of it, maybe they're not. Maybe it's because Kanzi was raised in a language learning environment that he has this ability. It's built on some other special condition for Kanzi, but nevertheless it's within the species range in some very rare way, right, at least. And I'm not going to run the whole video here, but he eventually gets to the box and cuts through. It takes him a little while to cut through as well. So it's not a single slice. He's got to really kind of saw backwards and forwards to do this. So how much cognition is involved in this? Well, here are Kanzi's products. So they're the Lamechwin ones. And Nick and Kathy tell me that, they would put Kanzi somewhere in here, right? He's doing roughly what these hominins were doing in Africa over 3 billion years ago. He's knocking off a single flake when he'll knock off certain flakes and reject them, but he's selecting certain flakes and then going off and using them, right? Discarding it when it's done, make another one. So here, I think also we can speculate that we have something like expertise without perhaps recognition of expertise. That is, there's some specialized knowledge that Kanzi has, but do other bonobos recognize that he has it and try to learn from him? There's no evidence of that. So Pampanisha is Kanzi's sibling that has also been shown to use stone tools. Kanzi would actually run in and try to disrupt her when he heard her doing it, not help in any way, right? So it was more of a competitive thing. I've got this power because I have this ability and you're not going to do it. But there was also no evidence that Pampanisha ever paid any attention to Kanzi for how to acquire this. So again, now when we turn and think about this progression, what can we say about the amount of cognition involved? And here I'm going to tell you about the work of a former graduate student of Nick and Kathy's. I was also on the dissertation committee for Robert Mahaney, who wrote this up in his doctoral thesis. Sadly, he died a year or so after his thesis, so this work is we're hoping somebody else will pick it up, but it's fascinating stuff. So among other things in his dissertation, he performed a meta-analysis of fMRI studies that involve stone napping, flint napping in some way. So you can't put people in an fMRI and have them actually do things, but you can have them watch videos of it and you can have them talk about the process of doing it. So he looked at a number of different groups of done studies where they put experts and non-experts or learners into fMRI and tried to figure out what's going on. And so he compared studies that looked at Olewan and Acheulean technology in the scanner and found that both Olewan and Acheulean technology activate several areas, but one of particular interest is this bilateral precentral eye field, which active in both forms of stone mapping. And it's involved in top-down visual attention, right, guided by stimulus response mapping. So I'm just reading from the dissertation here. Rules, such as the best location. So the task is still, even if you're making a single flake, you've got to decide where to hit this wrong. Because if you hit it wrong, it's going to break in two, or you're not going to get a flake at all, right? So your attention has to be focused on the physical characteristics of the stone, and that's the same in both. But what he found was that the Acheulean alone also engaged areas of the brain that are that overlap with cognitive control tasks, such as go-no-go paradigms. So don't know, you're all psychologists or most of these, so maybe I don't need to explain go, no, go to you, but these are effortful cognitive tasks, and we get a right inferior frontal gyrus activation with the stone task for Acheulean, not Alderman, right? So this suggests that there's something more complex going on there in doing that. Robert also, so what he suggests from this is that the Acheulean replication actually presents stone mappers with conflicting choices. When you try to make this more complex tool, there's any number of things that you could do. There's simply not one right place to hit this thing to get a flake off it, because you actually have to be thinking ahead to what happens after you've done that, and that opens up a space of possibilities where you get more uncertainty about this, right? Where, as I've just said, the older one doesn't have this feature. He also found that verbal working memory tasks overlapped in fMRI meta-analysis with the stone mapping and other cognitive control tasks, suggesting an important role for working memory in this task. So he tried actually to then assess what's going on in working memory. And this rather complicated diagram here, it represents the production of one stone X by somebody who's got a lot of practice and knows how to do this. And each of these little red or green arrows represents an actual strike on the rock. So you can see just how many hits on the starting core. They gave them a prepared core, a nodule like this, right? And they had to produce something like this. The red ones are where they did something without saying what they were doing, and the green ones correspond to where they verbalized something about what they were doing. And these lines here indicate how far in the future is what they verbalized actually happening. So at this point they say something which actually happens here. So at the beginning, this subject actually says something about what the end product is, so you don't get that till the end, right? And then does something about saying something, and then says something very particularly about what they're doing right at that very moment, and then says something that actually puts them this far ahead in the time sequence, right? So we can get a sense of the depth of processing required to anticipate this. And Robin actually does a comparison with Towers of Hanoi problems and how you have to sort of make some moves anticipating future moves in order to solve this kind of problem, try and quantify what this is in his dissertation. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend you go look. Yeah.
Could you go back one?
Yeah.
Just, it's verbal working memory tasks. What area did you mention in the direction?
So the verbal working memory, prefrontal, but I forget exactly where.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So this is a working memory task, because if you're going to do this, you're still going to remember each of your sub-goals and work towards that sub-goal. Right? So you've got to be able to keep those in working memory as you go. So here's an interesting chart from 2008, Dwight Reed, actually estimating working memory from cognitive experiments with chimpanzees and comparing it to what might be thought to be the working memory of the different hominid species as we go through time. So this is a number of years ago across here, so here's the present, here we are. It's wrong to put chimpanzee 6 million years ago, the common ancestor 6 million years ago. Time should really be over here in this chart, right? But with a much lower working memory capacity here. Now, some of you will know there's interesting stuff from other chimpanzee for visual working memory that might say that's probably the wrong number there, but we can talk about that later. But it's the kind of thing that I'm interested in that says, okay, what can we do to correlate what we know about working memory and brain capacity with what we know about the in present organisms? So, here and here, right? And try to extrapolate somehow to the intermediate forms. I've got some other things to say about working memory, but I think in interest of time, I want to move on to the thing I really want to get across in working memory, is that there's some really interesting work from Walter Kinch's group that's 20 years old now, looking at this phenomenon called long-term working memory. So we generally think of short-term working memory as something where you have a capacity of, if Miller is right, 7 items, if more recent studies looking at tracking moving objects are more like 4 items at a time. And that memory is extremely disruptible. So if I give you a task of tracking some objects and then I distract you with something else that requires you to use working memory, you've lost track of those objects and you can't go back to it, right? What Kinch found was that experts in certain domains actually had a form of robustness against this kind of working memory disruption, such that you could interrupt them, and then they could quickly get back to where they were. And this may work in a couple of different ways. So everybody is familiar from the very early work on this from Miller that working memory is really it corresponds to being able to track a certain number of items or keep them in memory, in working memory. But those items can be large chunks. So if you've over-practiced your own telephone number, you don't have to get all of the individual digits in working memory. You just have your telephone number as one item in memory. And so one thing that experts do is that they are bringing bigger chunks, right? So each of these might actually correspond to more stuff, right? But that wouldn't explain this robustness that I mentioned here to interruptions, because you'd still predict that if you disrupt what's in the working memory here, they're not going to be able to restore that as efficiently as they in fact can. So it turns out that non-experts, when you disrupt them, kind of have to go back to the beginning of whatever they were doing, whereas experts can very quickly bring back from some other storage, and this is what Kinch is calling long-term working memory, the configuration that they were working with before that disruption to their short-term working memory. So that's also something I think would be really interesting to look at in the context of the production of stone tools. If you interrupt an individual who's good at making these tools, how quickly do they resume with the steps that they were taking before you interrupted them, compared to the non-expert who's going to have to spend a lot more time trying to figure out what it was that they were doing before that interruption. And this could be really possibly important, as I say here, for learning and teaching, because if teaching essentially involves disrupting what you are doing, either because the learner is interfering with you, or because you're modifying what you're doing, you're altering the time dynamics of that in certain ways, then being an expert will give you more robustness and enable you to keep on track, as it were, with the ultimate outcome. So that's speculative, but I think it's interesting. So here's a summary and some final thoughts. The general picture is that feedback between expertise and recognition of expertise may be one factor, among many, helping to drive brain expansion, and the changes in the cultural niche that allow for even more specialized expertise. So it's a feedback system between this sort of division of abilities and recognition of division of abilities that then allows attention to particular parts of the social context, which then allows ramp up within those specializations. But that also facilitates a kind of social exchange, which leads to all sorts of collaborative activities. Even the action of hunting for these large animals has that kind of feature of intense collaboration. And I hope I've given you some reason for thinking that maybe a combined approach from comparative cognition and the more traditional paleoarchaeology is potentially stronger than either alone. So when we start putting these things together, we get the kind of most general story about how things in general hang together in general. But it's one that's evidence-driven. It's not just a purely speculative story. We're trying to take what we know, what we think we know about the cognitive aspects and what we find in the archaeological record. I'll say a little bit about this because I think I've got a couple of minutes to do it. Evidence for recognition of expertise is rare among extant animal species. One reason might be because cognitive ethologists haven't been looking for it. I have asked around, in fact, if anybody knows anything, I'd like to hear about it. I've been asking around for anecdotes about this, or any evidence whatsoever. And one of the people who's part of our group as an associate role in the project was actually in some of the pictures earlier. Kevin Hunt, he's a primatologist from whom I learned the facts about the anatomy of the arm. This is the kind of stuff that he works on. He works in Gombe, Tanzania, chimpanzees, the Jane Goodall site made famous. He says that there is definitely different abilities for hunting among the male chimpanzees there. But they don't seem to do much to either approach the better hunters to try to go hunting, or it just seems like when one of the better ones notices that there's a monkey that might be catchable, they hunt red colobus monkeys among others, that one will start moving and the others sort of follow. So maybe there's a little bit of a system there where the better animals are more likely to be able to initiate hunting. But the one other piece of anecdote, he says there's one male in this particular group that he watches that is really bad at hunting, but always wants to go hunting. And it's always trying to attract the attention of the other males and sort of lead them off, and they don't follow unless they themselves independently can see that it's worth going. So maybe a little bit of hint here that this individual realizes that it alone can't initiate this and has to somehow get the others moving. But he's observed this many times, but it's just one animal, so what to make of that. In general, though, I haven't found any really good examples of this. I think, though, also there's beginning to be a little bit of evidence of demonstrators who are good at some, say, tool-using task, modifying what they do slightly in order to make the task of learning easier, perhaps. But again, the evidence is controversial and not everybody believes it, so it's rather weak. One idea I've been thinking about too is that if we rather stop focusing on the teaching aspect, which is be very hard to demonstrate and controversial, so we stop focusing on how the individual already has the skill is changing its behavior. Instead, focus on the learner aspect. Who is the learner paying attention to? We might actually get some other interesting information out of that. So, in the end, of course, too, we need more and better analysis of the artifacts and fossils, and I've shown you this huge pile of labeled rubble, which is all product or byproduct of this tool manufacturer. It's overwhelming what's there and what one can do with it. But it needs to be also understood in the context of the sites where it's found. So, if we look instead, not just as a pile of rubble already brought into the lab, right, but go out to the sites and try to figure out over how many years was this produced? Can we detect, for instance, evidence of different handedness, left-handed toolmakers from right-handed toolmakers? Could we possibly begin to understand how those kinds of things are interacting? Because then we might be able to say, okay, there's good evidence that there was one left-hander in this group, and these are the tools of that individual, right? It's sort of wishful thinking, I realize, but it's not impossible, right? There's the potential for being able to do this kind of analysis. And then if we could also fit the pieces back together again, we could actually then reconstruct the kind of sequencing that I showed you in that long graph from Robert Mahaney's dissertation, where we would sort of know, how many blows actually were involved in producing this. That's also complicated because, as I mentioned, a lot of these tools have been get reworked, they get resharpened, right? So a lot of the pieces are missing, but still there have been some very interesting finds where pieces can in fact be put back together. So this cartoon always shows up in these kind of talks. So I don't know if this is the first expert or the first philosopher, but at any rate, clearly there's increasing evidence for the same areas of the brain being involved in careful manual skills, right? Precise timing and the precise timing for speech. These are co-evolved abilities. They're using some of the same machinery. And it's very then intriguing to think about how improved ability in making tools is a driver for and driven by increased ability to communicate about that process too, either gesturally or verbally. But that's really now into the realm of speculation that we don't have any good solid evidence for. So, thank you.
Open the question.
Well, it's interesting to the way you have been working with cognition, with the evidence of use of tools related to brain expansion. It's interesting.
I'm glad you find it.
But I found that it is a very complex problem to find evidence of cognitive use of looking to the tools used. It must be, it seems to be a very complex problem. Well, I would like to make you a question. What will be for you the main difference between use of stone tools and the modern ones, our technology, the information process technology? I found the main difference that stone tools takes a long time to develop, and the new one, the information technology, is very accelerated. It's really very, very fast. What would be for you the main difference between
right.
one and the other?
So again, in keeping with my general orientation, I think there are many differences contributing to this. But let me try to make a few points about it. So one of the differences that relates to what I've been talking about is that our approach to technology is itself a technology that's changed. So we have got better at designing things that you can use without really needing to know how they work. We can see this in the automobile, right? If you were an early adopter of the automobile, you better know how to fix it as well, because they broke down a lot, right? Now cars are so reliable that we rely on experts to fix them. Actually, it's even getting worse than that, because most of the people are not experts, they're just plugging it into a computer and some computer telling them what to do, right? But we've made it such that the appearance of this high technology actually depends on us understanding very little about how it works. That itself is a technology, I think. And it's a technology which depends on precisely this kind of division of labor that I'm talking about. So you don't have to be a programmer to use a computer. At some point, you did have to be a programmer to use a computer. Some of us remember those days, right? Now, people can do all sorts of things with computers with very minimal understanding of it. Of course, if they want to push the boundaries of what you do with it, then you have to understand more about what's going on. So we always have this range of abilities. And I think the other thing that's contributing to the acceleration of this is rather like that picture I showed of the increasing number of peaks as we go. We now have, I hesitate to put a number on it, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of peaks, right? So the sheer scale of what we're doing enables both you to pick up and use all of these fabulously designed tools, and also think about, oh, well, if I took this tool and this tool, which neither manufacturer may have thought about this combination, and put them together, I can do this other thing with it, right? So we have this much improved or increased space of recombination of the tools that we have. Why didn't it get going faster? Well, I think all sorts of reasons. Partly ecology. Life was hard back then in a way that it's not hard now. Food, predators, all of these things require time and attention away from doing this kind of work with innovative developed tools. One of the things you find, if you go back to the map, African origins out to Europe and to Asia, you tend to find as you follow that trail, the tools get cruder, not just because of the material differences that I mentioned, but speculatively because people who are migrating long distances in this way have other things to attend to. They just want a quick flight to deal with a meal before they move on. Now, we have to be careful here because it makes it sound like they made that whole trip in a few weeks, which you could actually, in a few months at any rate, right? Maybe this transition happens more slowly than this, but actually, 1.8 million years for Demisi, 1.75 for China, 500,000 years to cover that distance is a fairly slow progression. But we haven't found all the sites yet, right? We keep finding sites that push these dates back. Nobody thought they were going to find a 1.75 million year old site in China. Peking then that you've heard about is more like 1.3 million years, right? So the pace at which this is happening is also, I think, putting pressures on the technology, what you can carry with you, how much time you invest in doing it, and so on. So once we get agricultural and settled and larger scale, more differentiation, more time to specialize, right, the overall pace of innovation can increase. Yeah.
I like your talk a lot. The way you try to connect working memory with an expansion, brain expansion, and that with the way expertise and recognition of expertise gets better, right? Connection, something in connection with working memory. And I was thinking about when do you WYNN? Have you heard of him?
Clive Wynne?
Yeah, yes. But he's also his paper that we were actually working on recently about working memory and how it's likely that a better working memory is tied to somehow with language, right? To it makes but then you're saying, well, probably it's the executive function part of working memory, not the storage, perhaps the storage too as well, but mostly the getting a better executive functioning, what explains how like Neanderthals started talking or whatever, the communication became a lot more complex and more recursive and more, tie that with language as well has the advantage.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So you just want me to comment on that?
Yeah.
So one thing to push this further is to also recognize that in humans, at least, it looks as though we have relatively independent visual and auditory work. So for speech, the auditory loop is extremely important. It has different dynamics. It can hold a longer temporal sequence. It's important when we think about processing long sentences that you have some trace of what happened at the beginning of that sentence so you can match it up to what happens at the end, or anticipating, right? So you have this, you have this period of time in which you've got to hold in working memory of a phonological or auditory form enough information to be able to match things that come much later to things that came earlier as well. And that would support the more complex grammar and structure that you're talking about that we find in a lot of languages, right? Visual working memory might be somewhat different. It might have different dynamics. So there's a huge literature on this, and I can't hope to sort of represent it all. But if you're tracking moving objects, you can remove those moving objects from somebody's view for a period and then restore them, and they will be able to continue to track. But if you remove it for too long, they're not going to be able to track those objects, right? So there's a limit to how far you can go without that kind of information. But on the other hand, this is where I think the executive control comes in, is if I'm engaged in some more cognitive rather than perceptual tasks. And I am now trying to remember, okay, I've got to do A, B, C, and D, and I can't do D until I've done A, and I can't do C until I've done B, so, okay, let me do A, and now remember that the next thing I had to do was B. Okay, now I can do C because I've done B, now I can do D because I did A, right? And so you can get that kind of recursive structure going because you can keep these things active at any one time. And that's, I think that's an important aspect of this kind of less auditory, single train working memory. I think this term working memory probably needs more investigation.
But I was thinking just working memory, because there was this, I think not too many years ago, came out with an article that said that if you can improve working memory, and if you do, you can improve your IQ or your general intelligence, especially fluid intelligence.
So
right?
do you know how they were getting people to improve?
Just improving, the details of that, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they were trying to make people improve their working memory by trying to make them remember more items, for example, in a sequence or something like that.
So everything I know in that literature involves some kind of trick. So if you're supposed to remember 10 items, you actually learn to cluster them into sort of 5 pairs of items, right?
Okay, yeah.
And now you're back to your sort of 4 or 5 limit, but you've got a trick for reconstructing.
I would have to reread it to go deeper into that. But if it is true that somehow working memory is tied to intelligence, in fluid intelligence, reasoning and so on, then I think that you have also a stronger case for your hypothesis as well.
Yeah, and then, right, and I think it is tied, and to bring out all that evidence is an important thing to do, yeah. So, yeah, absolutely, I agree with that suggestion.
I wonder if you could tell us more about what would you say would be the forces driving evolution, specifically coming from this expertise and expertise recognition. There was a point in your dissertation when I thought, well, if only few people have this characteristic in a group, how strong a force to drive evolution could that be?
Related with that, there is an hypothesis of Ivo that said that there can be a possible big mutation in human cognition, and that's make work memory very stronger than other subspecies of hominids.
Yes. So I'm skeptical of single mutation stories, right?
Yeah.
I also, this goes back to work I did when I was a graduate student, where I actually built a computational model for a certain kind of working memory, in which the model that I built showed that you actually had to get an exponential increase in the regions devoted to this in order to add each item. So basically it's a power law, right?
Yeah.
Which makes increasing working memory incredibly expensive. I mean, why can we only remember if Miller's right 7 plus or minus 2? It's ridiculous. With brains the size of ours, I mean, your computer, you tap a character once and it remembers it, right? So, sort of like, any sequence is just stored with perfect fidelity in a much dumber system. So why do we have this sort of obvious limitation? And so that graph that I showed where you get these sort of slow increases from 1 or 2 working memory items up to 6 or 7 or maybe fewer if we're talking about tracking moving objects, I think points to me that it's not something mutation, it is actually something more gradual. And it's something more gradual that's built on a system that actually is very expensive to increase. Right? Now the question about how is this a driver? So again, it's one among many different things going on, I want to say. So there are lots of things that are driving the context in which this also can be a driver. So for example, and this comes back to looking at the anatomy as well, the hominins are spending more time on the ground, more upright. This frees up your hands to do things that you weren't free to do with them before. But it also puts you at risk from things that couldn't chase you up in a tree. Interesting aside, the Dmanisi fossils, which are making these tools and have decent sort of cranial capacity in the upper range at any rate, still have toe adaptations for climbing trees, right? So it looks like they're going up in the trees at night. That's the safest place for them to be. And it's absolutely striking at this site. This site is enormously rich in large animal fossils. There are just thousands and thousands and thousands of animals there. Not a single bite mark on any human fossil, which in other places you find evidence that humans being eaten by crocodiles. That's actually one of Jackson's specializations, is figuring out who got eaten by a crocodile, right? But somehow or other these individuals are completely avoiding, and they seem to have an anatomical adaptation still for going up in trees. But as you're going out in trees, you need a more cooperative, right? One person against a lion or an elephant or a mammoth is actually a huge risk. Elephants still can kill people, right? But collectively, we can hold those at bay. So you need a kind of cooperative structure within. And now the pressure is, okay, maybe it's not just all of us standing up there and yelling at the elephant or whatever it is that we do, but you stand guard and do that, and I will carve the meat off whatever it is we just killed, the young elephant, let's say, right? Because the mother's now enraged at us, right? But if there's some recognition that you're more efficient at carving, and you're better at sort of waving your spear at the elephant, whatever it is, then we can begin to get this pressure for this division of labor, recognition of expertise, and all the rest of it, which comes along with the move into a different ecological niche.
It's quite a social pressure.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. I mean, humans are very, very social. And this also, so this phenomenon of alloparenting, where you have care for the young by non-immediate parents, non-parents, right? Then that also could be driven by this, because individuals have to go out gathering food, right? Whether it's hunting or berries. Somebody's got to stay behind and watch the kids, right? You can't leave them alone. It's not effective to take them with you. So that too maybe responds to this change in the ecological context in which humans are operating, hominins are operating. Yeah. So that's the kind of the account that Stironi is very good at giving. What he doesn't do, what I'm doing here, is trying to get much more detail about the cognitive mechanisms involved, rather than more behavioral ecological context in which that's happening. But I see it as sort of an extension of his story in a way, and trying to understand what kinds of cognitive capacities are required to produce the kinds of situations or artifacts that we find.
Perhaps you get to find one expert's typical hand reading that novel.
Yeah, right. So could you get anatomical specialization being driven? Right, so you get something like a selection for that specialization within a particular lineage as well. That would be very interesting. We just don't have enough fossils for that. Yeah. Right, we don't know who's related to whom. Although, techniques are getting better and better for extracting DNA from these ancient fossils as well, which is another interesting part. Good. Oh, yeah.
Very general speculation. I disagree that it's a change in working memory that we need to refer to all these huge changes in brain capacity or brain size. Because we're at 7, 9 being the +2, right? Or even less.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the minimum for working memory capacity needed? 2, and then does it really make 5 items a difference? Perhaps it's more like what you were mentioning before. it's not just sheer memory working your capacity. There's some other algorithms, strategies.
Yeah.
You have an economy of behavior that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You get a portion of the tribe making tools, and that liberates time to do other things.
That's right.
And that works
Yeah.
like a memory tool, right? You have people
Yeah, some people are better at
produce
doing this
tools,
than
and
others.
you just have to get a tag saying that is where I go to pick up tools. I don't need to.
So I agree with your disagreement, you might be surprised to hear. Because what you said was, you don't think that it is working memory that makes the difference. I don't think it is what makes the difference, right? It makes a difference among many other things, including all of the other things you just mentioned. So here I'm trying to explain the part of the project that says, how can we bring information, comparative information from diverse sources, compared to modern humans, compared to extant primate species, how can we bring that into this problem of understanding what's going on in the fossil record, right? So working memory was one very interesting thing to look at, and it's partly driven by this kind of research here, where I didn't explain what the sort of vertical lines are here, but these correspond to major transitions in the process of making. So basically, if you're making one of these axes, you start with an unformed piece of rock, and you have to sort of first roughly get it into shape, and then you start working on the edges. And actually, in later Achillean technology, you even, at the final step, change the tool that you're using to knock with. And they were making, they were sort of trimming up the edges, actually using antler, a soft hammer instead of a hard hammer. So each of these corresponds to one of those shifts, and you notice that, even at different points in here, right, there are references to that same thing, like this transition, I forget which one it is, right, is being referred to here, and here, and here, and here, and here, right? That's being held in memory somehow as a goal that we're working on, right? And so if you count sort of how many of these transitions are there, right, you've got to keep these sort of 4 sub-goals in mind as you're working on this task, right? Or you could be just driven by, you don't know why you're doing it, but you produce whatever this stage is, and now that triggers you to produce this other stage. But there are lots of reasons for thinking that's an implausible account of what's going on. This is not just a sort of a learned sequence of behaviors, because it actually, the rocks are all different, and there isn't, you have to sort of try different things, and sometimes something goes wrong and you have to reevaluate what you were doing. That's the conflicting part of it that I was talking about before. And this schematic here, which I didn't explain some more in 2010, says, if you start with a core and you want to make an edge, you've got to hit it here to get one chunk out of it, and then you've got to hit it here and here to get some other chunks out of it, and then you've got to do these 4 hits to get those 4 chunks out of it. The reduction of the core to a sharp cutting edge has this kind of hierarchical stage structure to it that he explicitly analogized to sort of, first goal is to get all the things separated, right, and then build back up.
I think that's what I was thinking. It's more like the broader reasoning skills that can be represented as a hierarchy.
Yeah.
That really make good use or better use of your very limited working memory.
Yeah, good, exactly.
You can go back to clinical studies, those very rare clinical studies where you have people with a memory capacity of 1 or 2 items. And they function basically fine. And they have problems learning languages.
And they probably can't solve that problem alone either, right?
Probably.
Right.
But they function well.
They function well. So this gets back to the point of rare behavior, though, right? So we're all pretty competent socially. Again, there are outliers, right?
Yes.
But maybe this kind of reason thinking through is one of those rare behaviors which that nevertheless contributes. And that actually reminds me of something I wanted to say in response to your question as well, because some of the cultural evolution studies, people like Boyd and Richardson, have pointed out that through modeling the process, that if everybody's an innovator, Nobody's copying what anybody else does, following what anybody else does. That doesn't work. And if everybody's just a copier, you get stuck in a rut. You need some proportion of the population that is innovating, and then others recognizing the value of those innovations and following it, right? So the population as a whole can't sustain, right, a large burden of either innovators or pure copiers. It requires even division of labor at that level. So I think that, the people that you're talking about are, they're just fine at tasks for which we have sort of good social cognition mechanisms that don't put a burden on trying to figure out what's going on when things go wrong.
In the context of your talk, they are very good at using tools, not making them.
Right.
And not solving problems in very complicated nature. But they do solve regular problems.
Yeah. So I would love to get an estimate of what, how many people are actually making tools, how many of these companies are actually making tools versus using them from these ancient sites. But, I keep asking this question, everybody goes, yeah, that's a really interesting question. We don't answer that yet.
You need a time machine, right?
Yeah. We're pretty sure that when they're hunting, like bring down large animals, they're carrying a core with them and making flakes as they go. Because this is another experiment that Nick and Kathy actually did. They actually carved up an elephant that was already dead, that they got permission to carve up, using only these stone tools. And they go blunt very quickly. So if you don't have the means to resharpen as you go and knock off more flakes, right, you're never going to manage to carve up an elephant just with what you have to handle there. So there's also a fair amount of foresight and planning in terms of transporting material. But is everybody doing this, or only some doing it? And we know they're transporting material from sort of 10 kilometers away, or places that can be seen on the horizon, sort of tufts of rocks sticking out of the ground, are being transported and then work. But is everybody transporting and then working, or some people, you're just big and burly, you carry it, bring the stuff to me and I'll make it. We really don't have any current understanding of that, but with more and more information from the taphonomy, as I said, these are empirical questions. The question is, can we get the information that we need? And I also didn't explain really this one picture of the Tanzania thing. That just gives me an opportunity, because part of the project, part of what the funding is doing through Nick and Kathy's part of the project is they're actually, for the first time ever, drilling cores into the region in which all of these things are found to try to understand what the landscape was. Because there's a lake here that shrinks and expands at different times. And so the people, we're finding things in the areas that are dry now, but they might have been at a lake edge at some point, right? And of course, what we're finding is under the ground. You have to excavate it to it. So there are no surface features telling you whether there was once a lake there. So this is a brand new approach to getting more information from the taphonomics.
Colin, thank you so much.
You're welcome.